Hi, this is Joe from Tasket.me, and we are continuing a conversation of series talking with professionals. And today, the concept that we want to talk about is Agile and Lean. So this is something that we had heard recently and becoming much more popular. And today we want to talk with David to explain what Agile and Lean is. So David, could you introduce yourself, who you are, and what do you do?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm David, CEO and co-founder of Driver. We're a Bangkok-based next-generation telematics startup. So what we do is we collect data from vehicles, we analyze that data, and we help companies save money on the cost of running and operating those vehicles. We also reduce accidents, and we help save people's lives if they've been involved in an accident. The technology uses a smartphone as a sensor, captures the data, and then we analyze it and then can detect things like accidents or poor driving behavior. And we've deployed our solution in Southeast Asia, Australia, Latin America, and in Africa as well. Great to be here, Jotaro.
Yeah, thank you for your time today. Definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you was we know each other for maybe a year now. And from my experiences as a startup founder, I have listened to various startups and talking to you, and everyone knows that you are one of the leaders or expert in the Agile and Lean frameworks as well. But again, for students in the recent generation, maybe it's something, it feels like a new concept, but those who are in the startup ecosystem has been a concept has been implemented quite from a while ago. So I just want to ask, when was your first exposure to the concepts of Agile and Lean?
So it was actually a while back. It would have been around 15 years ago. I was working in the UK. Maybe I can step back a bit and talk about before I was exposed to Agile and Lean. So I was working on a project in London, and it was a booking engine for a hotel company. It was actually a major competitor of Expedia, right? So Agoda is obviously a big Thai booking engine as well, and Expedia is one of their main competitors. But this company I was working with was a competitor of those guys. And I was a project manager at the time, and I was tasked with revamping this booking engine, implementing a new booking engine. I had a timeline, I had a budget, and I went about like a lot of the decisions that had already been made before I started there, and it had already gone down this course of traditional waterfall style project management. So what that essentially means is you go through a series of steps, right? So the business says, okay, well, this is what we want. We're going to define all these requirements. It then passes the stage gate and it gets handed over to the development team. The development team goes and develops that and then hands it back over 6 months, 12 months later. And then that would be, you would then see the code of what's implemented. And then if you want to do any changes, or in that 12-month period, if the world is changed in any way, of course it never does, you would then need to put in a change request, and then you go back and have a commercial negotiation saying, actually, no, we don't want that feature anymore. Let's change things. And that means you need to pay more money, you need to extend the timeline, or both, right? So that project was a disaster, right? I was in charge of it. I put my hand up and take responsibility for that, although a lot of those decisions that led to it being a disaster had been made previously. But essentially what happens, we spent a long time documenting the requirements, around 4 months. That went off to this development team in Sri Lanka, who we had no visibility over. We had very limited engagement with those guys. There wasn't like a weekly Scrum meeting or anything like that. There was a kind of every few weeks I'd send an email asking them how that was going. They would say, hey, everything's fine. And then eventually we saw some code back from those guys. They gave us a demo after about 9 months, and it was not at all what we wanted, and it wasn't even vaguely similar to what we had actually requested. And the problem with that is that I realized immediately that, well, okay, these guys have no experience booking hotels and have never done that before. When they book a hotel, they just rock up to some place, or they ring a relative, or they just ring someone up, or they at the time Facebook was fairly early days. So what I realized there was that we're taking on a lot of risk because there's this huge gap and the business had changed, right? That was the very early days of OTAs, online travel agents. And the business was evolving quite rapidly. The business I was in, we were still sending out bookings, confirmations via the mail, and visiting hotels ourselves, right? And in that 12-month period while we were waiting, we decided to stop doing that. And we changed a lot of our internal processes, and that was kind of only partially reflected the requirements. The end result was that the project blew out and we had to redevelop a lot of it, and then we had to change our internal processes. We ran out of money, and then the business eventually failed. So not a good outcome. My next role was working for a company that was making what's called added value accounts. We'll go into a lot of detail about that, but essentially you went into a bank, you bought a bank account, and you got free a whole bunch of other stuff with it. So for example, £10 worth of iTunes vouchers, travel insurance, priority pass access, all that sort of stuff. So that was my first exposure to Agile. And essentially I was the, again, the project manager involved here. But this time around, the company trained me in how to be Agile and how to, how to look at projects differently, how to understand that the end goal is not, the end goal is to have working software as soon as possible, right? It's not to go through a checklist and make sure that all the requirements are ticked off, or to create this adversarial relationship, which is what kind of developed with us with this offshore development team we were working with. So yeah, I've been practicing Agile and been a huge supporter for at least 15 years.
Yeah, definitely surprised that it was like Agile or at least Lean concepts were there 15 years ago. I thought it was much more recent, maybe because my kind of understanding of Lean came from the Lean Startup book, which basically became a Bible for startups back then. So I guess you have been in this kind of Agile framework mindset for a while now. For those who are still a bit unsure, including me, what is Agile? What is Lean in the most simply put way?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And there is actually debate on the answer to this question. So there is a, there are different definitions of what both Agile and Lean is or are. And there isn't a universally accepted answer to those. So some people will say Agile, for example, is a mindset, right? Others will say it's a framework. Some will say it's a process, right? Agile, I would call it a kind of mindset, if you like, with a framework around it. So for example, Agile normally uses, there are frameworks for Agile like Scrum, for example, or there's this large scale Agile. There's a few other frameworks. I forget what they're all called, but essentially there are certain things that characterize Agile. So for example, iterative development across in short times, right? So development focused on prioritization, right? We use Agile in the way that we work. And essentially to us, it means Scrum-based development, where you do work in short iterative cycles. And maybe I can just briefly show you an example of what that looks like from Henrik Nyberg, who shared this with many people in Bangkok. Okay, so across the top here, we have a very traditional, the objective here is the same, which is to be able to move around town comfortably, and to get from point A to point B. So in the top scenario, you're only able to get from point A to point B after stage 4, right? So first stage, you're building the wheel, then you build the axles, the chassis, then you're building the body, and then finally you get in the car. So only after 4 weeks would you be able to actually achieve your objective, which is to travel from across town. In our Agile world, what we have is we start off with a little skateboard type solution, which, okay, you can travel around town, but it's going to be quite slow. When it rains, it's not a great solution, and it's dangerous in the Bangkok traffic. Then we add a little motor to that, and we're getting, okay, same problems, but a little bit better. Okay, I'm getting there quicker now because I have a bicycle, but I still have a lot of those same problems, right? But at least I'm actually getting there, right? Finally, we have a motorcycle. So I don't have to worry about, someone fat old guy like me who's unfit, now can actually be able to get to that meeting without having a heart attack, right? And then finally we have a car. So in this case, it looks like it's convertible, so you'd still have a problem with that brain. But But anyway, you get the concept, right? So top stage, you only really have functional working, a working product at the end of that stage, right? So you've got these different stages that you go through, and then at the end, you've got it. Down here, you do it incrementally. You build it a little bit as you go along. So, a great example of that is our new product that we've just been working on for driving behavior. It's an app that we've built for a customer in Cambodia. They're actually already using it right now, even though we're not even halfway through development of it yet. So the beauty of that is that you can get feedback immediately. You can actually improve things as you go along based on customer feedback. This reduces your risk, right? Because the speed to market is greatly reduced. In this case, let's say each of these is months. So after 4 months, you can then get, and you've burnt 4 months worth of money here. So let's say you're spending $10,000 a month. You spent $40,000 before you get your first customer feedback. Here, let's assume that's the same $40,000, but at stage 1 here, you're already getting customer feedback, right? So the idea of this is, as soon as possible, validate your product in the market, get feedback from your customers. It's all about speed to market, about being quick, being agile, if you like. Okay, happy with agile?
Yeah, definitely. I guess just the takeaway is implementing change in an ever-changing environment in an iterative way. And this kind of diagram that extremely simplified the concept of agile, and definitely was probably going to steal this diagram to explain the concept of diagram in the future as well.
Please do. This is Henrik Nyberg. He's got a fantastic book. So for those of you who don't know who this is, Henrik Nyberg is I think he's a CTO, but he's a very senior tech guy at Spotify. So he's really made that an amazing company to work at. And from a kind of agile point of view, that is one of the companies that people hold up as a great example of a fantastic place to work. So agile also values things like small teams. Traditional software development, you might have a team. I've worked in teams where there's been hundreds of people, right? I've also worked in agile teams which have been hundreds of people, but normally the team is like 5 or 6 people, right? Because the idea is that you can't have a valuable meeting with 100 people where 100 people can contribute. You can have the boss standing up there and barking out orders, right? But you can't have 100 people being able to interact easily and comfortably. So small teams, break down the work as small as possible, keep it as simple as possible, and deliver as quickly as you can, iterate quickly. Yeah, so that's agile. Okay, now let's move on to lean. All right, so I'm using this to illustrate a lean process, right? So what we have on the left-hand side here is a done column. So this shows all the work that's been done for this week, right? So you can see who's assigned to it, what was actually done. We can open up one of these tickets and you can see all of the different things. So for example, here we have a work on operations customer support work, which is how do we handle customer mail outs and newsletters? Looking at different tools that we could use. There's an outcome for it. There's a due date. There's a list of tasks. So we can open that up, and I don't know whether you can see this, but you can see things to consider, important communications, etc. Right? All of the tasks that are done, those are all ticked off, and this box here is ticked, and it's in the done box, right? Now, in order to get into that done box, it actually has to go through a review process, right? So it's working from left to right in this case, right? So the furthest things on the right are things that are like this backlog, are things that have not been done at the earlier stages, right? It goes through this process. But for the reason we have done on the left is that when you open this up, it's a kind of psychological reason. You can see, hey, this is what I've done this week. Look at all this cool stuff that we've done already. Yeah, that's why we have there. Instead of going, fuck, look at all the stuff we have in this backlog. God, so much work to do. I'll tell you that, David, he's just such a monster, that guy. Anyway, so we then have in review, right? So in review, we look at, this is basically saying it's somebody else, you've done a bit of work and somebody else is reviewing it. Now, this doesn't mean I'm reviewing it as the boss or some other manager. For example, I asked Namtan here, who joined us through Tasket. She's an awesome former law student, but actually now working with us as a business analyst. And I asked her to review something that I did the other day because of her. She's very good at attention to detail. So I said, okay, look, I've got this NDA that I've looked at, looks fine to me. Can you please take a look? And I put it on her to review in there. Yeah. So it's a peer review process, right? You then have in progress. So one of the concepts in Lean is called work in progress or a WIP limit, right? So what that means is you can't be working on 20 things at once or 30 things at once. You can probably do 2 or maybe 3 things at one time. So we set this WIP limit to 3, right? So that means that you can't have more than 3 things in your in progress. So in progress means this is what you're doing right now today, yeah? So you've got a list of things here. You'll be assigned to that. You can see your face on there, and that person is responsible for that. Sometimes there may be 2 people. The other person will have a input into it, but there'll be 1 person responsible. What you're working on next is inside this next up chart. So this swim lane here covers that's next up, and you can see somebody's actually working on this right now, and they've actually pulled a ticket out of there. And then finally we have backlog. So backlog is, this is all of the stuff that we actually need to be doing or should be doing, but it isn't necessarily assigned. It isn't something we're working on right now, but it needs to be done, right? So for example, here we have pay Hong Kong supplier invoices. So that needs to be done. You can see there's a date to it next week, etc. Right? And then another part of the workflow is if everything flows as we want it to do, it goes from backlog to next up to in progress to in review to done, right? But not everything works that way, right? We know in the real world that sometimes things intervene, right? There may be a problem, so we put it on blocked and on hold. So for example, we can see there's a bunch of different things in here. I'm probably sharing a bit of confidential customer information there, but we can see in here, we've got things that are being blocked because of whatever reason, right? Or they're on hold. So for example, let's say we have we're waiting on a customer to respond to something, right? That would be in there as blocked and on hold, right? So I hope that's a good example of a lean process in action, right? That isn't a definition of what lean is. It's just an example of what lean can look like. Okay, but lean essentially, it's all about understanding that you have constraints and you need to be able to manage the process from end to end, right? So lean and agile are not the same things. What you can see there is an example of how lean is about managing workflow and about managing what people are doing, right? Agile is more about managing the business prioritization backlog, right? And delivering incrementally and quickly. So the 2 work well together. But yeah, so does that give you a pretty good idea, definition of lean and agile?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a great kind of explanation where agile and lean is at this kind of top of the umbrella. Then you have various frameworks, such as said Scrum or Kanban. These are a framework within this kind of mindset of lean and agile. So I think it would be great to kind of have that kind of direction for students to think about, not just searching what is agile, but try to think about what are the frameworks underneath this agile and lean mindsets in a sense. Absolutely. So I guess one of the things I'm actually personally curious about is, for example, if a student were to intern for a project management position, and the company they are working with, a startup or whatnot, has not implemented this kind of agile / lean framework within the company itself. So as a student or as a fresh grad coming into this company, and his or her responsibility is to implement this kind of agile framework or lean framework within this non-existent company, what are the key things that a person should think about in order to kind of implement these strategies?
That's a great question. So I've actually been in that position myself where I've actually implemented Agile at a company that didn't have Agile before, right? And look, this is part of what's called change management, right? Where what you're doing is you're actually bringing in a new process and you are changing people's mindset and people's approach to doing things. Now, what you need to understand is that not everyone is going to embrace that change and want to do that change, right? So You need to make sure that you, one, bring those people along, but you also need to have other people, as champions of that change, right? So you can't do this yourself, and you can't be kind of like, the guy at the in the locomotive at the front driving 100 miles an hour when the wagons are falling off the back, and you've got to bring people along on the journey, right? So it's not just about, okay, well, I read in the book somewhere that Agile's awesome, so let's do Agile, right? The best way to do it is to pick up a small project and implement it using Agile. That's exactly what I did when I was at this company. The last company I worked at, it was around 10 years ago. In fact, I was a passionate Agile person. I used to go to all the Agile meetups and so on. And I brought that into the company by actually implementing it at a team level, at the team that I was leading. Our team actually had previously been practicing some form of Agile, right? But it was nothing like what Agile should be in the real world, right? So, for example, the daily stand-up meetings, which are meant to be the team reporting to each other and giving themselves and each other encouragement so they can move forwards, had become a kind of Maoist style, mea culpa, where you threw yourself on the ground and begged for forgiveness about why you weren't able to implement something the day before, right? Agile, you need to be, it's not about, reporting to management, that kind of meeting. It's about making sure everyone's up to speed. And the sign of a healthy daily stand-up is, what happens after that? Does everyone just go back to their desk? Or no, they actually hang around the whiteboard and they start talking to each other. Go, hey, I've got a problem with the commit yesterday. Can you help me with this, and this? Or the CI server's not working, or whatever, right? Those kind of discussions are a sign of really healthy startup. So look, I think what I really like to do, and what I'd like to see in any interns that we have joining the team, we're looking for people who can really show some initiative. And I know it's very hard because traditionally in Thailand, that hasn't been encouraged, right? Both at school and at university level, except for maybe a small percentage of the very elite sort of people. Most people are not encouraged to think outside the box and to try make change, right? It's kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. So I really try and encourage people to make decisions for themselves, right? And that starts by very small things, right? Giving people, responsibility for things, helping them out, showing them how to do things, but then putting trust in them that they can get things done, because it takes confidence to make change. So realistically, the likelihood of of an intern coming on board at a company that's never run Agile before and being able to implement Agile within a month or 2 months is extremely slim, right? Unless that person has super magnetism, it's not going to happen. What they need to do is demonstrate the benefits that Agile has at a small scale, and they need to get people on board with that, right? So at a startup, you need to get the founders, the development team, and others on board with that journey. It's not going to be something you can do yourself. Like any change management, you can't impose something from authority. That doesn't work either. You need to bring people along on the journey.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important concept. As Gen Z, I guess the demographic has their own values and they want to make change in the world, right? Whether it be within a company or within the society itself, and extremely motivated to do so. And I think that is a very, very important thing. Change doesn't happen with just conflict all the way. We need to have some people who will come to you as a champion of change as well. And also, I think the case that you said about starting, I guess, Agile in a small scale is extremely important. I always tell the students that use Asana or Trello in your group work in university, right? When you have a group, you're working with few teams, just start using Asana, just start using Trello, and just get used to this kind of Agile framework, breaking down tasks and prioritizing it with deadlines and the flow that you can actually see the progress as well.
And for managers at companies who are working with interns or like relatively inexperienced staff, I would encourage people to give staff responsibility and to also encourage teamwork, right? Encourage people to work on a project as a small team. Like, so one of those projects that we looked at on the Agile board there was actually looking at the tools that we should use for email marketing. Now, I have some ideas about how that should be done, but rather than me saying, okay, we use this tool, I actually asked the guys to think as a team, what would be the most appropriate tool? Because it's not going to be me using that on a daily basis. It's going to be those guys using it. So that it gives people power to make a decision themselves, right? And it doesn't really make that much difference to the company, right? Whether we pay $15 for MailChimp or $17 for XYZ, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, yeah? But for that individual person, it gives them a huge amount of responsibility, and they can actually feel valuable for themselves and for the company. They've made a decision.
I guess for the closing thoughts, DRVR has been a supportive client of Tasket.me and have been using Tasket Find into the future. And we have been having positive feedback from all the interns that end up in DRVR, saying that they had such a great learning experiences, and the confidence that the interns that have went and worked with DRVR is up the roof. I can think about Jason as well, who were interning with you. Then now he's starting his own business regarding digital marketing. And it's a night and day difference as well. So maybe a last word for someone who are maybe interested in interning at DRVR, what they can expect. As you said, you highlighted some of the key points, but what are the things that makes DRVR's drivers so good at interning?
Well, thank you for your kind words, and also I'm extremely happy that Jason's launched his own startup. Look, for me, that's obviously we would much rather Jason had stayed on at Driver, but he took a big step there and he decided to launch his own startup, which is awesome. I mean, I think for me that's it's a real testament to the company and the culture that we create, that we've had 3 or 4 startups come out of Driver, right? Which is just awesome, right? It's really good to see. So in terms, we actually have a marketing position open at the moment. So if anyone's interested, do please apply. We are still looking. So it's a really awesome opportunity to take a little bit of initiative, put into practice some of the things that you've learned, but you're going to learn a lot more new stuff. So working at a small startup like Driver is not easy. You're going to have a lot of responsibility. For example, at the start of like 1 week ago, I had no idea that we were going to be, that this huge opportunity which just landed in our mailbox this week was going to be there, right? Literally a week ago, I did not know that, right? So, as a startup founder, the journey is a roller coaster. For the actual people working at a startup, I try to, protect people to some extent from that kind of emotional roller coaster. But it's a really interesting environment to work, and you'll find that it's not for everyone, because not everyone can deal with the pressure, with the responsibility. We try and make it as easy as possible for people. I encourage people to learn. We have various training courses, Udemy and other tools that we offer people to use. And also, we've sent people on training courses. We've sent people to Spain, to Korea, to Japan, Taiwan, all over the place, right? I get to go to industrial estates in the outskirts of Bangkok, but our interns get to go to Barcelona. I mean, anyway, look, as I say, we are looking for some new interns to join the team, and we are looking for people who are interested longer term. So whether you're a Thai, a foreigner, or from wherever, or whatever gender you are, doesn't matter to us, right? We judge people based on what they do and what they deliver, not who their parents are, not where they come from, where they were born. That's irrelevant to us, right? So we'd love to have you on board. Please do apply. Thank you.
With that, thank you very much, David, for your time. It was an extremely illuminating conversation. I personally learned a lot. I had troubles actually explaining the concepts of Agile and Lean myself. I tend to overcomplicate things, but with the background, history, and so on, it was an extremely interesting conversation. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you as well. Great to talk to you as always.